Scene 4 has us back with King Duncan and his sons and Lennox, and he is waiting for Macbeth to return so he can give him his rewards and praise him for his job well done in the battles against the rebel MacDonald, as well as the rebel Cawdor and Norway. Duncan, he starts off by asking if Cawdor's execution has happened yet. Is he dead? And are those who were tasked with the execution returned? Malcolm tells him that they have not come back yet, but he has spoke with the ones that saw him die. Cawdor confessed his treasons and also implored for a pardon. So he was like, please forgive me. I regret what I've done. He's looking to spare his life. And then Malcolm says, with a little bit of a snooty attitude, nothing in his life became him like the leaving it. So I think this hints at Malcolm saying that Cawdor kind of begged for his life. He was very desperate to get out of the situation that he was in, and nothing in Cawdor's life was done that fervently, was worked that hard in order to get him off the hook, right? So he's saying, you know what? His life was useless before. His life was kind of garbage. He was willing to throw whatever it took in order to get off the hook, and he's kind of despicable. So Malcolm, of course, doesn't like the traitor Cawdor. Duncan then says, there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face, which means that you can't understand somebody simply by looking at their face. And then he says he was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. So we learn right away loyalty is important to Duncan, right? It should be important to any king. And this is ironic because we know Macbeth is already entertaining some dark thoughts after the Weird Sisters' prophecies towards him. So, of course, Macbeth enters with his traveling crew here, and Duncan right away launches into how impressed he is with Macbeth. He says, "Oh, worthiest cousin, the sin of ingratitude even now was heavy on me, so I feel guilty for not giving you your just deserts, for rewarding you, for praising you enough. I feel bad for it." He says, should have been a little bit faster. I should have done everything I could to repay you. He also says, you know what? If you had done less, the reward that I'm giving you now would have been apt, would have been well deserved. However, since you did so much more, what I can give you right now and offer you right now as a reward is not enough. So Duncan is very upset about this. He is a good king, right? Macbeth talks about how the service that he's done and the loyalty that he owes Duncan pays for everything that he does. He doesn't need any additional rewards. And again, right, we have to take, this is very interesting. Shakespeare chooses Macbeth's first lines to certain characters very carefully, right? The very first line to Duncan is talking about the loyalty that he owes him. We know that loyalty is already in question because of the witch's prophecies. He goes on to say and praise Duncan a little bit more, talking about how he is happy to serve the crown, serve his children, serve his country. He's doing what he should. He is being loyal and he is serving his honor. Duncan, of course, says that he's welcome here and that he's going to plant thee. He's going to plant Macbeth and make sure he grows into a full tree. Basically, he's saying, I'm going to make sure your career goes awesome. I'm going to make sure you have everything you want in your career. Then he turns to Banquo and was like, yeah, like you are just as worthy as everything that Macbeth has done. Banquo is probably the lesser captain here, so he doesn't get quite the amount of rewards that Macbeth does. But obviously Duncan's like, hey, you've done just as much for me, and I do appreciate it. Banquo, he says something very similar to Macbeth. He says, you know what, if I grow, the harvest is yours, so anything that I accomplish, I credit to you. So both Banquo and Macbeth, humble at the beginning, loyal at the beginning, and they do love Duncan. They respect Duncan. Duncan, he goes on a little bit of a speech here, and this speech is very important to play. So he is making an announcement that has something to do with the throne, and then he says in front of all these sons, kinsmen, thanes, in front of all these people, he's going to establish his estate upon his eldest Malcolm, whom we name hereafter the Prince of Cumberland. So he's actually just named Malcolm his heir to the throne. Prince of Cumberland is traditionally the title that you would receive if you are next in line. So now we have Malcolm as the next king of Scotland. Wait a second, wasn't Macbeth supposed to be king at some point? So Macbeth says, the rest is labor which is not used to you. So I'm happy working for you. I'll be myself the harbinger and make joyful the hearing of my wife with your approach. So I skipped over that. Sorry. These last lines here, Duncan just says, we're going to go to Inverness. So that's actually Macbeth's home. So Duncan says, hey, let's go to your home. Let's feast. Let's party. And Macbeth is like, it'll be an honor to host you. My wife will be so happy. And then Duncan's like, my worthy Cawdor, thanks so much. And Macbeth has a little bit of a side. He's talking to himself. Remember, there's other people on stage, but he's just talking to us and himself. And he says, the Prince of Cumberland, this is a step on which I must fall down or else overleap. So he's saying, you know what? Before, on his path to king, it was him and Duncan, right? There's only one step. You just have to make sure Duncan was out of the way. Obviously, probably a little bit more complicated than that, but he wasn't thinking about that. However, now that Malcolm has officially been introduced as the heir, which probably would have been assumed by a lot of people anyway, Macbeth says, well, now there's another step in my journey, right? If I want to get to the king, I either have to overstep this obstacle, right? Malcolm being heir, or I'm going to fall down and fail my goal, okay? He asked the stars to hide your fires and not let them see his black and deep desires. So he's kind of asking for dark to hide so no one can see these terrible desires within him. He's starting to think some bad thoughts, right? His ambition is starting to creep up and take a hold of him. So Macbeth, he leaves. He's on his way home to talk to his wife to get everything ready for this big feast. Duncan, he's in the middle of a conversation here with Banquo. They're just talking about Macbeth. He's like, hey, you're right. Macbeth is valiant. He is good. I do love him. He's a good soldier. And it seems Banquo has been talking about how good of a person Macbeth is. So we need to understand, it's very important, Macbeth is a good dude at this point. Okay, he's a good man. He's an average man, and this ambition and this dark desire to become king that's been implanted in him from these weird sisters is going to start to take hold of him, and we're going to see how that changes him.